about DNA test. And, like DNA tests have become a bedrock of our legal system. If you get DNA, it says you were there, you're pretty much convicted. If it says you're not there, you can pretty much get out of it. But I saw you put out an interesting video on DNA testing, and I'd love to hear your opinion.
So this is a big one, and this goes with the whole Luigi situation. I don't know who did what, but I do know that we should ask questions about people getting convicted using DNA and PCR tests, because DNA and PCR tests are connected. So I started looking into all the forensic documents of how they classify someone as being convicted. And I started to see that they used a PCR test to get the DNA. And I started thinking, oh, okay, you can crank that up and get the result that you want. That's number one. So then I found that first flaw. The second flaw I started finding was that they were talking about the error rates when they're doing fingerprints, when they have, for example, a weapon. If a person is there, there's up to two errors, and there can be a 60% chance of two errors when a person is when they're picking the evidence for saying why somebody's guilty. Two errors is crazy because 60%, two-thirds, and this is going through all of them. And this is all on the government websites. You can just look this all up. So I was like, okay, so you can be falsely convicted. Then I started to look up about how they find DNA, and they say that DNA can be found a couple days later. But when you start to look up all the rules, it says that DNA cannot be found a couple days later because it can be damaged by sunlight, weather conditions, and all these things as well. So then I started going, okay, so then how do you convict somebody days later? So I find it's like a UK.gov website, and they start talking about how DNA is not used to convict somebody, it's up to the judge. And I started going, oh, wow. And as I started going through this rabbit hole, I started looking up, well, what does DNA look like? Right? Because everybody always tells me I got DNA, it's like a little X and Y's and whatever you've been sold and told. And I realized that they used an X ray machine on salt. This is what's great on salt to determine the picture of DNA. And this is what they have used. It was Rosalind back in the 1930s until now. They show you that little X and Y chromosome or whatever it is. That's the picture of salt that has been x-rayed. But the funny part is, if you think about DNA, when you look it up, it says that it's damaged by an x-ray. So how can you determine, there's so many loopholes in this,
That is insanity, dude.
how can you determine anything if you're using, number one, a PCR test, which we know is completely cranked up, then you're saying it's somebody's DNA, and then when you go to see the actual documents and the paperwork, you see that you could just convict somebody just because. And then I started to think, how many people, and this is like since 1986 or before the PCR even came out, and because it's been out I think for a while.
Kelly Mullis, right? Is that his name? Mullins or Mullis that invented the PCR test?
Yes, yes, that's the guy, and he created the PCR test back with the whole HIV AZT AIDS situation. When they were poisoning people with AIDS, I mean, sorry, with AZT, and then saying that they had the HIV AIDS, but in reality they were just getting poisoned by the prescription pills, and they used the PCR tests to say you got it. And it made me start to think, okay, well, how many other things are faked with this testing? Because if you can falsely convict people, you could put people in jail all the time. You just have to fit the suspect. They always say like person of interest. Well, anybody can be a person of
That's
interest.
so interesting.
I mean, it's anybody fits that. So then you got that part. Then I started going, okay, well, what other things are PCR tests used for? Because let's go through those rabbit holes. So you go to the ATNA website, and they can diagnose up to 1,000 illnesses with a PCR test. And that includes cancer, that includes herpes, that includes HPV, that includes the flu, anything that they want to come up with. So if you wanted to orchestrate a pandemic like we've already went through in 2020, you could use the PCR test to tell everybody they have an illness that they don't have just by using that. Then I was going deeper into the PCR test because I started looking at GMOs. And we've been told about this one. Everyone's, oh, it's a genetically modified organism. They somehow pull the sequence of
Hold
some.
on, hold on. I just want real quick.
Go ahead.
So what you're saying is when they test your DNA, they're not actually it's what is the process you think that happens there? Because this is like mind blowing.
Yeah, they're just really just kind of making things up. I mean, that's the best way to describe what our DNA testing is, because if you don't have the original, right? Like you have the X-ray of the DNA, but it's not. We don't have that picture. People can like type in like, what's an X-ray of an atom? It's just a blurry photo. So if we don't have this control to see like what we're seeing, how can we test for it? And the more I would go back with how the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, based on Eustace Mullins' work, own the medical system, they own the testing. So they can make up all kinds of stories. And then you go into who owns all the DNA tests. It's BlackRock. BlackRock
So
and Vanguard.
so when you go, when not you, but when they go, oh, DNA testing wasn't available back then, we're we're testing them now, and it's say it's 25 years later. You're saying that that's kind of impossible?
Yeah, because you don't have a control. If you don't have a control, how do you compare it to? If you say that I'm allegedly from a monkey and you can't see what's actually in the monkey, and you can't actually see anything because electron microscopes only see dead substances. So if you can't see a living thing underneath a microscope, how can you determine that this is X, Y, and Z? And then you can say, oh, this is what we have. Well, that's what you've made up. And that's what I started to realize with the whole PCR thing, the DNA thing, and then all of these rabbit holes, because they're all interconnected. You could create all these additional industries that you would like from your, broken medical system and lie to the people and say, oh, you know what, Sam? It's genetic. You're getting older. You're from so and so. They just know you're from so and so because you wrote it down on a piece of paper. They don't. They don't actually know. They
Well,
just you wrote it
can I,
down
I'm
when you were
sorry.
maybe a kid. You were like, I'm from X, Y, and Z.
Can I
So
ask you? So I know people who have discovered siblings from DNA tests across the country, like that they had no because of some, let's say, chicanery by their elders in their youth. Someone
What you're saying, Dad was
someone
a
sowed the
Rolling
wild oats,
Stone?
is what I would say. Yeah, someone sowed the wild oats. Uh, how's that possible then if there's not some efficacy to the testing of DNA?
So paternity tests are using PCR tests.
Well, no, it's not a paternity test. So this is through the commercial DNA testing. Like I think it was 23andMe, and they discovered someone who they know now and has been admitted is a sibling of theirs, who's just completely cross country, oblivious to it for 20 years.
Well,
How would that?
I mean, I mean, personally, you can forge anything. I mean, that's what I've started to realize. Like, I mean, I could tell you that you're my cousin, and if I show you documents and I put it down on this piece of paper, I could say you're my cousin. You
So,
know,
but in your model, that's not possible. It's what I just described. Like in a to be valid, that wouldn't be possible.
I don't think we really know anything when it comes to it. Like I've actually started to realize we've been told a lot and it's really easy. Okay, like even child support, for example, and I'm just using that as an example. You could get somebody to pay child support, even though they are maybe not the father of that child, by using one of these tests to tell them that they are the father. And I think that that's where, when you get all this error rate and all of these things, we have to start asking, well, if there's this many errors in this system, how can we determine any of the things that we're saying? And if
I'm
somebody
not.
says,
I'm open minded to everything you're saying because I think there's truth to it. Is it possible that when you say it's a 60% failure rate, that the 40% can be true? That there is something there for them to be able to connect people like Johnny said, two people together through DNA. It was very weird. Like somebody told me a story about their friend. There was a big comedy show called Dublin's in Los Angeles, and one day this chick who was from Jersey went to the show, met a guy, they hooked up, and they never saw each other again. And then, like 20 years later, he, someone does a test and he finds out he has a kid, and the kid shows up and they look exactly alike. Is it possible that that 40% still exist, that it still is detectable?
well, I mean, if you get into the testing, the problem is when you start reading the documentation for the testing, there's a lot of errors and flaws. So I mean, I get what you're saying that there could be. Now, there's other things that could be related, which is frequency and people being around certain people. For example, when two friends are standing around each other long enough, they start to look like each other. And as they spend time long enough with each other, they start to look like each other. So I think more of that. It's in my opinion, it's really hard to believe anything of the medical system because there's just so many errors when I start going through it.
All right, let's go for it.
Because, okay, so we know about GMOs. Everybody knows genetically modified organisms and everything else. I started researching into how do they test for a GMO to tell you it's a GMO. They use a PCR test. That's how they tell you. They do a PCR test on the GMO to determine that it's a GMO. So let's take Monsanto. You got a little seed of Monsanto seed. It lands in your farm. Monsanto sues you because their seed landed in your farm. What test are they using? PCR test. So and I'm just using that as an example.
Oh my God, you're totally right.
Yeah. That's why I said if you can fake one, and that's why I'm just using that as an example. If you can fake one, you can fake other things, and you could fake a whole bunch, and you could put people, and that's what I'm saying. It's layers of confusion, because if you keep people in layers of confusion, then they can't get to the root cause, which you're just being lied to. Like everything, like it's a scam. Like that's the easiest way. But you could sue then people. You could sue farmers. You could tell them, oh, my seeds are in your backyard. I got to sue you now. And you could go through and get rid of the organic farmers just by using this test. So that's why when I started,
you are so right on that. Wow.
All of these things with testing, you start getting mind blown to where if you're using this PCR test for everything, then okay, what else do you use it for? mRNA. In order to test mRNA, you use a PCR test. Well, if you can't see what mRNA is because you don't have a machine to see mRNA and to even know what mRNA is, and you use a PCR test, how do you know that it's mRNA? You just come up with a term. And that's what I started realizing is these terms have been just kind of bombarded to us over and over and over again until we believe it. So that's kind of what my opinion is with the whole, you see DNA and you see PCR and you see how all of these things go hand in hand.
I agree. I think there's definitely something there. 100%. And like the fact that you brought up that the Monsantos can use that to cripple a farmer is just absolutely insanity, but lines up perfectly with why they would use a PCR test, which makes you wonder why Kelly Mullis, why did he get a Nobel Peace Prize for that? And it's almost like you look at all the people who got Nobel Peace Prize, it's almost like he was being rewarded for coming up with a tool that allows them to basically lie to everybody.
Yeah.
And even in his own thing at the end, because when you see interviews with Kelly Mullins, whatever his name is, he looks tortured. He never looks comfortable. He's always like kind of twisted, and we lost him. And dude, we got too close to the truth. We just got too close to the truth.
But no, you're totally right. Kerry Mullis has got like a darkness over him, doesn't he? Like a shadow.
Every time you see him talk, he's like twisted, and he's talking like this, and he's just looks like he's going through it. And right before COVID comes out, they ding him. They ding him. He's done. He's dead.
Yeah, but it completely made sense on how he said how you gonna test that how you gonna make sure that test isn't real with that seed. When they tell you it is, you got to take it. If Monsanto tells you that's my seed, how you gonna argue with them?
Yeah.
Well, I find it interesting if they could use this information in a test, because you go, okay, there's a bunch of people that got out because it said it wasn't their DNA, which probably it wasn't. But what about the guys who it wasn't their DNA? They were told it was their DNA.
Yeah. I just got to pray that that's not happening that much, because God knows that's the worst. I mean, that's the worst.
Well, Johnny, what if we
for innocent people to be in jail?
What if Tino Sanchez? You might know Tino Sanchez from the Tinfoil Hat Show. You see him, remind him that you know him from the show. That he always says, like, the Innocence Project, which I've been giving money to forever, because I hate to see anybody who is in jail for a crime they didn't commit. I'd rather 1,000 guilty guys get life than one innocent man be put to death, you know? But he's always like, they're just getting.
You rather 1,000 guilty guys go free than one innocent guy be put to death, right?
Yeah. Well, no, I'd rather those 1,000 guilty
Well, I
guys
mean, we'd
do
all rather than
life,
be in jail, yeah, but
right? Than like then have one. If you're like 1,000 guys, 1,001 guys committed murder, and we're gonna put them to death. But if we do that, we're gonna include this guy that's innocent. I'd be like, no, just give him life. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'd rather.
yeah,
You know,
I mean, it's a saying though.
Yeah, it is a saying. I probably butchered it like I butchered Matt's last name. But the point is, you know, but Tino Sanchez from the Tinfoil Hat Show, he often says that they're just trying to get narratives out of jail.
It's a 1769 doctrine that the law holds that it is better for 10 guilty persons escape than one innocent suffer. So it's 10 to 1. It's not, we were exaggerating it.
We're way over.
But I think like 1,000 to 1's it probably worse, right?
Morally,
yeah, for sure.
I feel like,
for sure. So is Matt gone?
He's not returned to the chat. I mean, to the thing. I'll see it as soon as he does.
It wasn't on a phone, right? Because usually that means his phone might have died.
They killed the internet. That's why I literally ran downstairs, checked it. Now I'm out of breath, but yeah.
Take a breath, buddy. You're killing it. You're doing great. You're doing great. We were just talking about how, like, you know, we have a good friend of ours who's on the show a lot, and he's giving me shit because I support the what's it called, Johnny?
Innocence Project.
The Innocence Project. I send up money I've been sending it since my kids were born, which is now going on 5 years. So I've been sending them money, and Tino has always said that he felt like they were just doing narratives, that they were freeing narratives. And Johnny and I were always been like, you know, they do it through DNA, but man, that's like kind of crazy. It's kind of crazy. They could just decide, oh yeah, maybe it's like they look at the evidence and it's so obvious that he's innocent and he was convicted that they'll be like, oh, we're just gonna set him free with DNA testing. It's interesting, dude.
Well, you know what case was crazy? Remember that case on Making a Murder? Was that the one with that one kid that was kind of autistic? Do you guys remember that one where they used the DNA?
Yeah, we remember Brandon Dassey, the most impressive mind in the history of the United States. Are you kidding? Yeah.
Let him go to WrestleMania.
I just want to go to WrestleMania. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I did it.
I have to watch that Candace Owens thing because everyone, if you can even get it anymore, she's not on the Daily Wire, but that must be a lot. And she says he did it, but go on, Matt. What were you going to say?
No, I was going to say, and then you think about how many people have been falsely convicted and put into the system, you know, because they need X amount of people in the system at all times, you know. So that's the question of how many people have been falsely convicted using this PCR test and this forensic test. I mean, it could be thousands, it could be hundreds of thousands, you know. And you have to think about like back in the day too. Like back in the day, they could get away with, for example, convicting somebody by just saying like you're guilty, you know. I mean, that's what was happening back in the 1919 Kansas flu. If you didn't take the vaccine, they put you in jail, and that was it. Like you had to fight for yourself, defend yourself, or the mob of people would collect you and put you into the jail.
Crazy.
It is crazy. The mob, like everybody's always like, you know, if I was in Nazi Germany, I wouldn't have done that, and you're like, you would totally have done it. You did it with this. I see it like with my friend Leonardo Joni. All of these comics are trying to get her canceled. It's like it's your peers you got to worry about. It's like really bad. And so they would totally do it. And everyone's backtracking now like they weren't a part of that. It's crazy to me.
Yeah, and that's like you said. I mean, during 2020, who was enforcing the rules? You know, when you went to the grocery store, you know, it was the people who were working the grocery store.
Yep.
And that's pretty much what you were dealing with. You know, they were trying to tell you, you got to do this and you got to do that. Then if you went to another place, they just had different enforcers. And the people were pushing. And this is how they used communism. You know, speaking of World War II and that whole situation, you know, with communism and Marxism, that's how they control things. They use the mob against the people to make them believe that they need these things. And that's what's been going on
You're
for a long
so
time.
right.
And
You're so right.
1929 Great Depression to 1933 and that whole situation, you know, they preached communism and socialism will save your life. And Social Security, which you'll pay for the rest of your life and you'll pay taxes on that for the rest of your life, will also be, you know, a benefit to you. And that's the thing is when you look at how we think about things, that's why I like to just look at stuff from every angle and punch holes in it because I realize it's like it doesn't make any sense. And if we blindly believe the nonsense or narrative that we're told, then we're just kind of leading ourselves to our own demise, you know?
I mean, what we're talking about right here, the average person could not in any way understand. It's so crazy to me. It's so deep. And you're talking millions, billions, billions, if over time, trillions of dollars at stake, finding a way to just manipulate the herd and to get them to base. I mean, like everyone's backtracking on these things. Like people are calling for people who didn't get vaccinated to get thrown in jail, thrown in camps, isolated. And now they're like, "Oh, I would never have done that." You're like, "Dude, you got this video of you saying all of that." And it's like, I would get in fights with people that like were kind of sensible, people, and they would like argue with me on the definition of herd mentality. They're like, that means everyone's gotten the vaccine. I'm like, no, dude, that's been around forever, that term. And that's when basically the entire herd has gotten sick and then they've all beaten whatever it is. And that is herd mentality. If even that, herd immunity, excuse me, if that's even true, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, I've realized that illness is just what you do to your body. And that's pretty much what it is. What you eat, what you drink, you know, what you sleep in, the materials that you wear, the people that you might be around, because they could make you sick, you know, just being around them. And then also too, you know, just the Wi-Fi or the pinging of the radio frequencies. That's pretty much it.
I'm with you on that.